hold out your arms to me. I strive for you and give you the best I hope to be. May your wisdom be your armor, your compassion be your sword. May your strength be forged with mercy, your courage lies restored. Homeland, the country that I love, forever reign supreme. And when time stands still, my homeland, may heaven hold your dream.
Howdy, I'm Porter Garner, class of 1979, President and CEO of the Association of Former Students. Welcome to the Association of Former Students 2023 Muster Roll Call for the Absent. This morning, we are in the Clayton W. Williams Jr. Alumni Center on the campus of Texas A&M University, where we are joined by over 50 volunteers who are participating in this year's roll call. I have long believed that of all our grand traditions, muster is indeed our most sacred tradition. I further believe that this one tradition, perhaps more than any other, best showcases what makes Texas A&M and Texas Aggies so very special. So on this most sacred of Aggie days, I thank you for doing your part to honor the noble legacy of muster by joining us as we say here and mark our fellow Aggies present in our hearts.
Roll call for the absent by Dr. John Ashton, class of 1906. In many lands and climes, this April day, proud sons of Texas A&M unite. Our loyalty to country, school, we pay and seal our pact with bond of common might. We live again those happy days of yore on campus, field, and classrooms, hall, at drill. Fond memory brings a sigh, but nothing more. Now we are men, and life is one great thrill. On Fortress Isle 81 years ago today, a group of gallant Aggies led by Moore, held simple rites, which to us all doth say, the spirit shall prevail, or cannon roar. They thought of home and all we hold most dear. Where are they now, those boys we knew so well? Ask of the winds, let smile repress a tear. Think only of their glory when they fell. Corregidor, forevermore a hallowed name to countless sons of Texans yet unborn. Symbolic like, it stands for deathless fame, a shrine sublime till resurrection morn. Softly call the muster. Let comrade answer, here. Their spirits hover around us as if to bring us cheer. Mark them present in our hearts. We'll meet them some other day. There is no death but life eternal for heroes such as they.
The 2023 worldwide roll call for the absent comprises 1,274 names of Aggies whose deaths were reported to the Association of Former Students since the previous muster. Some of those deaths happened more than a year ago, but the passing was not previously reported, so the name has not been called previously at any Aggie muster. The worldwide roll call for the absent will proceed from oldest class year to youngest. However, names added to this roll after April 16th are grouped together near the end, followed by the names of some honored faculty, staff, and friends of Texas A&M. Names that are initially called incorrectly will be called again in a correction segment at the end. For help finding a specific name in this roll, please visit tx.ag/2023index.
Charles Leffler Beatty, class of 1917. Here. John Forsyth Dexter III, class of 1940. Here. Jack L. Ballard, class of 1942. Here. Dr. Robert Bruce Caraway, Jr., class of 1942. Here. Jean Marion Gear, class of 1942. Here. Lieutenant Colonel William Danridge Claiborne Jones, class of 1942. Here. Joseph S. O'Connor, class of 1942. Here. Lieutenant Colonel Larry R. Smith, class of 1942. Here. George Clyde Van Cleve, class of 1942. Here. Robert M. Warren, class of 1942. Here. Emmett O. Anglin, class of 1943. Here. Labron F. Ezel, Jr., class of 1943. Here. Daniel Emil Havelka, class of 1943. Here. Lieutenant Colonel Charles W. Levitt, Jr., class of 1943. Here. Colonel Benjamin Herman Schleider, Jr., class of 1943. Here. Robert Gerald Weist, class of 1943. Here. William D. Allison, class of 1944. Here. Edward Carr, Jr., class of 1944. Here. Willard A. Flowers, class of 1944. Here. Junius Bost Fox, Jr., class of 1944. Here. Richmond D. Garrett, class of 1944. Here. John Milton Good, class of 1944. Here. Vigo Kaler Gruey, class of 1944. Here. Walter E. Lamb, Jr., class of 1944. Here. Robert Clarence Raykemper, class of 1944. Here. Linwood Steglick, class of 1944. Here. James G. Chatmus, class of 1945. Here. James Winfield Nance, class of 1945. Here. Clarence Ray Skurlock, class of 1945. Here.
Robert V. Thurgood, class of 1945. Here. Dr. J. T. Westbrook, class of 1945. Here. Joseph William Westmoreland, Jr., class of 1945. Here. Leslie T. Wilhelm, class of 1945. Here. Dr. Harold I. Daly, class of 1946. Here. Lester Bradley Gray, Jr., class of 1946. Here. Robert P. Heath, class of 1946. Here. Robert A. Hooker, class of 1946. Here. Colonel Oliver Ross Oliver, class of 1946. Here. Harvey Oakes Sargent, Jr., class of 1946. Here. Jack DeMint Swalwell, Sr., class of 1946. Here. Milton H. Abelow, class of 1947. Here. Gerald Murphy Bean, class of 1947. Here. William Gunn Johnson, class of 1947. Dr. Ed Crow Miller, class of 1947. Peter Paul Skripka, class of 1947. Charles H. Weinbaum, Jr., class of 1947. Dr. Alton Arnold Bishop, class of 1948. Percy Beecher Botting, Jr., class of 1948. Olin Maurice Boyd, class of 1948. Arthur Wilborn Brown, Jr., class of 1948. Robert C. Dickens, class of 1948. Dr. Don B. Farrell, class of 1948. Colonel Robert Franklin Lynch, class of 1948. William S. McDonald, class of 1948. Jack W. Reed, class of 1948. Irvin Rovinsky, class of 1948. J. Holly Stafford, class of 1948. James Verner Ulmer, class of 1948.
Dick Parker Wall, Jr., class of 1948. Here. James Raymond Whitfield, Sr., class of 1948. Here. Roger T. Wiley, class of 1948. Here. Dr. William Floyd Alexander, class of 1949. Here. Dr. Archie Purcell Andrews, class of 1949. Here. Frank N. Bogus, class of 1949. Here. Clifton Joseph Bolner, class of 1949. Here. Calvin Leo Crossley, class of 1949. Here. William E. Garrison, class of 1949. Here. Vernon Harrison Goodwin, Jr., class of 1949. Here. Joseph Gray, Jr., class of 1949. Here. A.N. Dutch Hartman, class of 1949. Here. Arthur Earl Heggie, class of 1949. Here. Albert S. King, class of 1949. Here. William Bradford Lancaster, class of 1949. Here. Marshall Elmer Laswell, class of 1949. Here. Colonel Gerald Riley McManus, class of 1949. Here. James K.B. Nelson, class of 1949. Here. Hubert Buren Nutt, Jr., class of 1949. Here. Dr. Paul Ray Reed, class of 1949. Here. Grady Eugene Russell, class of 1949. Here. Charles Donald Schmidt, class of 1949. Here. Everett Burton Turner, class of 1949. Here. Brigadier General Billy Mills Vaughn, class of 1949. Here. Davis Davidson Williamson, Jr., class of 1949. Here. James E. Arnst, class of 1950. Here. Dr. Gerald Lagar Atmer, class of 1950. Here. William D. Beatty, class of 1950. Here. Charles Joseph Bonnet, class of 1950. Here. Cecil J. Cheney, class of 1950. Here. T.F. Daly, Jr., class of 1950. Here.
Lieutenant Colonel J.T. Dotson, class of 1950.
Here.
James Harold Flowers, Jr., class of 1950.
Here.
Joel Richard Hubbard, class of 1950. Here. Horace Russell Ladymon, class of 1950. Here. Walter B. Littlejohn, class of 1950. Here. John Harrison Malden, class of 1950. Here. Donald Parker McClure, class of 1950. Here. Charles Ray Mitchell, class of 1950. Here. Dr. John R. Norman, class of 1950. Here. First Lieutenant Edward O. Price, Jr., class of 1950. Here. Colonel James Scarborough Sibley, class of 1950. Here. William Eugene Smith, class of 1950. Here. Benton Ewell Terry, Jr., class of 1950. Here. Colonel William DeWitt Turley, class of 1950. Here. Paul Howard Wells, class of 1950. Here. Malcolm Morris Williams, class of 1950. Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Donald E. Alford, class of 1951.
Here.
Dr. George W. Barclay, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Dayton Byers Blaine, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Frank L. Brown, class of 1951.
Here.
Robert C. Brown, class of 1951.
Here.
Clifford Ray Brunson, class of 1951.
Here.
Dr. Jesse L. Buffington, class of 1951.
Here.
John H. Edwards III, class of 1951.
Here.
Lewis Ed Finley, class of 1951.
Here.
Raymond C. Gasecki, class of 1951.
Here.
Donald L. Grant, class of 1951.
Here.
Dole Ray Griffin, class of 1951.
Here.
Theodore Charles Lawrence, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Reuben B. McDonald, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Robert Lynn McGuire, class of 1951.
Here.
Jess David McIver, class of 1951.
Here.
Dr. Charles A. McNeil, class of 1951.
Here.
Jack Edward Mergula, class of 1951.
Here.
Albert E. Nicholson, class of 1951.
Here.
John Moeller Oglesby, class of 1951.
Here.
Charles L. Pence, class of 1951.
Here.
James Eugene Pianta, class of 1951.
Here.
Aaron Burr Riley, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Frank P. Sherrill, class of 1951.
Here.
Frank E. Simmons, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Clark Barclay Smith, class of 1951.
Here.
Billy Joel Underwood, class of 1951.
Here.
John Bradfield Vittrup, Sr., class of 1951.
Here.
James Arthur Warmker, class of 1951.
Here.
William F. White, class of 1951.
Here.
Arthur W. White, class of 1951.
Here.
Dr. Walter Dumas Wilkerson, Jr., class of 1951.
Here.
Joseph Arthur Wilhelm, Sr., class of 1951.
Here.
Jerry Lloyd Williams, class of 1951.
Here.
Douglas V. Adamson, class of 1952.
Here.
Carl Franklin Basden, class of 1952.
Here.
Harold Clay Baird, class of 1952.
Here.
Thomas David Badney, class of 1952. Henry Christian Brandt, Jr., class of 1952. Charles H. Brummerhop, class of 1952. Eric Wilburn Carlson, class of 1952. Richard Thomas Cliff, Jr., class of 1952. Charles E. Klinger, class of 1952. Dr. Thomas W. Comstock, class of 1952. Alan H. Cooper, class of 1952.
Thomas Leighton Dashel, class of 1952. Robert Dean Farmer, class of 1952. William Wallace Graves, class of 1952. Harry Joyce Green, Jr., class of 1952. Robert Galen Jones, class of 1952. Dr. Edgar L. Judy, Jr., class of 1952. Roy Lilly, Jr., class of 1952. Dr. Rex M. Maddox, class of 1952. Thomas Quitman Martin, Jr., class of 1952. Dr. James D. McCready, class of 1952. Jack Cody Milligan, class of 1952. Vernon Bruce Morse, class of 1952. Thomas Edwin Moses, class of 1952. William Joseph Neely, class of 1952. Elo Emil Novitza, class of 1952. George S. Porcher, Jr., class of 1952. James J. Story, class of 1952. Dozier Milford Summers, Jr., class of 1952. James Walter Taylor, class of 1952. Rudolph Almaguer, class of 1953. Carl O. Berglund, Jr., class of 1953. Paul E. Cameron, Jr., class of 1953. Archie A. Cathers, Jr., class of 1953. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Floyd Doby, class of 1953. Malcolm Curtis Douglas, class of 1953. Fred Rankin Grody, class of 1953. James Wesley Haney, class of 1953. Dean Sanders Kennedy, class of 1953. G. W. Bud Longsary, class of 1953. Don Howard Morrison, class of 1953.
Dr. Gerald Burt Mugg, class of 1953. Dr. Thomas R. Murdashaw, Jr., class of 1953. Donald Harold Niederer, class of 1953. Franklin J. Pagel, class of 1953. The Honorable Bill Charles Presnell, class of 1953. James M. Price, class of 1953. Lieutenant Colonel Rogerio I. Robago, class of 1953. Howard E. Richardson, Jr., class of 1953. Richard B. Scott, class of 1953. Robert M. Sherman, Jr., class of 1953. Alfred Vanderstucken, class of 1953. Thomas S. West, Jr., class of 1953. John Murray Yantis, class of 1953. Dr. James Robert Baird, class of 1954. Dr. Glenn Arlen Blake, class of 1954. Herbert Wayne Brewer, class of 1954. Richard Dennis Cole, class of 1954. Dr. James R. Collins, class of 1954. John T. Duncan, class of 1954. Dr. Ben F. Fort, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Daniel Ignacio Galvan, class of 1954.
Here.
Max P. Green, class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Robert Lee Harris, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Richard A. Hentz, class of 1954.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Melton George Hollebeck, class of 1954.
Here.
Jerome Willard Johnston, class of 1954.
Here.
Elmer Eugene Kilgore, class of 1954.
Here.
Blake E. Lovelace, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Milton Eugene McFerrin, class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Jerry Don Mosley, class of 1954.
Here.
Michael David O'Brien, class of 1954. Clyde Graves Perkins, class of 1954.
Here.
Eugene Francis Polzer, class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Loie K. Rice, class of 1954.
Here.
Jerry Lee Sales, class of 1954.
Here.
John Edward Simpson, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Walter Peter Steinman, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Marvin N. Swink, class of 1954.
Here.
Douglas Glenn Symank, class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Alvin Wesley Talish, class of 1954.
Here.
Homer Lee Thornton, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
James C. Trimble, class of 1954.
Here.
Dr. Ide P. Trotter, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
James Elmo Whedon, Jr., class of 1954.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Verlin Eugene Westmoreland, class of 1954.
Here.
David Bruce Winston, class of 1954.
Here.
Frank Rogers Yakel, class of 1954.
Here.
Robert E. Burns, class of 1955.
Here.
Charles Burton Carpenter, class of 1955.
Here.
Toby Jason Chandler, class of 1955.
Here.
Lloyd Benjamin Cook, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
William H. Gober, class of 1955.
Here.
Gerald Joseph Gondrin, class of 1955.
Here.
Gene Graham, class of 1955.
Here.
Delvin Lee Krause, class of 1955.
Here.
Raymond H. Lammert, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
Roy Harold Markward, class of 1955.
Here.
Robert M. Miller, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
John Joseph Moritz, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
Glenwood Walter Specht, class of 1955.
Here.
Dr. Robert K. Strickland, class of 1955.
Here.
Leonard Allen Shearhart, class of 1955.
Here.
Carol Stoner Vance, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
Don Franklin Wessels, class of 1955.
Here.
Kenneth David Wesson, class of 1955.
Here.
Emil Frederick Wilms, class of 1955.
Here.
Dr. James Blanton Wilson, class of 1955.
Here.
Harold D. Wolfe, Jr., class of 1955.
Here.
Colonel Gene R. Anderson, class of 1956.
Here.
Glenn David Churchill, class of 1956.
Here.
Edgar M. Douglas, class of 1956.
Here.
Jerome Samuel Fromm, class of 1956.
Here.
James Richard Gertis, class of 1956.
Here.
Robert C. Goodman, class of 1956.
Here.
Frank A. Holbrook, class of 1956.
Here.
Dr. James Melton Howell, class of 1956.
Here.
Harold G. Jacobson, class of 1956.
Here.
Dr. John Hughes McCrary, class of 1956.
Here.
James Edwin Oberndorfer, class of 1956.
Here.
James A. Pohl, class of 1956.
Here.
Colonel George L. Price, Jr., class of 1956.
Here.
Colonel James Ernest Rambo, class of 1956.
Here.
William Harold Sellers, class of 1956.
Here.
Robert Orville Sinclair, class of 1956.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Brock Stables, class of 1956.
Here.
William H. B. Thode, Jr., class of 1956.
Here.
Indelicio Vela, Jr., class of 1956.
Here.
Kenneth Frank Wood, class of 1956.
Here.
William Tandy Ayers, class of 1956.
Here.
Reverend Dr. Robert N. Bacher, class of 1957.
Here.
Kenneth Bruce Baird, class of 1957.
Here.
Edward Marshall Burwell, class of 1957.
Here.
Mitchell Hugh Butler, class of 1957.
Here.
Luis F. Castro, class of 1957.
Here.
Bill Lewis Clark, class of 1957.
Here.
Teddy L. Clark, class of 1957.
Here.
Alfred A. Croy, class of 1957.
Here.
Harold E. Curtis, class of 1957.
Here.
Ernesto L. De Leon, class of 1957.
Here.
Nick George Dokos, class of 1957.
Here.
Sammy B. Edwards, class of 1957.
Here.
Charles Curtis Felkner, class of 1957.
Here.
Leroy C. Forster, Jr., class of 1957.
Here.
Lupe Fraga, class of 1957.
Here.
Dr. Ronald Charles Francis, class of 1957.
Here.
Donald Forrest Green, class of 1957.
Here.
Jimmy Dale Harris, class of 1957.
Here.
Will Clayton Hendricks, class of 1957.
Here.
Dr. John E. Hoffman, class of 1957.
Here.
Harold D. Jenkins, class of 1957.
Here.
William Edward Kahn, class of 1957.
Here.
R. Drake Keith, class of 1957.
Here.
Carl J. Keenley, Jr., class of 1957.
Here.
Lowry Mays, class of 1957.
Here.
Charles Pate Pecora, class of 1957.
Here.
James B. Rowland, class of 1957.
Here.
Joseph Collins Sanders, class of 1957.
Here.
Jack Solka, class of 1957.
Here.
Colonel James Benjamin Thompson, class of 1957.
Here.
Billy W. Wagner, class of 1957.
Here.
Major George H. Watkins, Jr., class of 1957.
Here.
Edmund Doak Wilson, Jr., class of 1957.
Here.
Dr. Lawrence T. Barron, class of 1958.
Here.
Eugene Leonard Beeger, class of 1958.
Here.
James C. Blackman, class of 1958.
Here.
Colonel William Walter Bryan, class of 1958.
Here.
Roger Lyndon Chambers, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Huell Edward Connor, Jr., class of 1958.
Here.
William Pinckney Cooner, class of 1958.
Here.
Gilbert A. Freytag, class of 1958.
Here.
Enrique C. Gonzalez, class of 1958.
Here.
Welton H. Jones, Jr., class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. John Thomas LaCroix, class of 1958.
Here.
Gary Porter Lemon, class of 1958.
Here.
Colonel Billy W. Libby, class of 1958.
Here.
Colonel Darrell Cloyd Marshall, class of 1958.
Here.
David Rhodes Mayo, class of 1958.
Here.
Brian McDonough, class of 1958.
Here.
James David McMaster, class of 1958.
Here.
Carl G. Merrill, class of 1958.
Here.
William Haskell Nelkin, class of 1958.
Here.
William Pascal Odom, class of 1958.
Here.
Carl Roderick Osborne, class of 1958.
Here.
Charles William Phillip, class of 1958.
Here.
George C. Rio, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Sam Houston Ridgway, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Lloyd Benjamin Sells, class of 1958.
Here.
James Monroe Smith, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Richard Meade Smithwick, class of 1958.
Here.
Eska Marion Tebbs, Jr., class of 1958.
Here.
Thomas Calvin Todd, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Henry Key Tom, Jr., class of 1958.
Here.
James T. Treweek, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Robert Lowell Walker, class of 1958.
Here.
Robert William Wenck, class of 1958.
Here.
Eugene Francis White, class of 1958.
Here.
Dr. Henry Lee Williams, class of 1958.
Here.
Lorenzo N. Williams, class of 1958.
Here.
James E. Willis, class of 1958.
Here.
Edward A. Wilson, Jr., class of 1958.
Here.
Frederick Weir Adair, class of 1959.
Here.
C. Thomas Aylesworth, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Peter Montgomery Bainham, class of 1959.
Here.
Tommy Lee Barganier, class of 1959.
Here.
Wayne Floyd Batson, class of 1959.
Here.
Thomas Henry Bravenek, Sr., class of 1959.
Here.
Durward Lamar Brown, class of 1959.
Here.
Jerry Morton Brown, class of 1959.
Here.
Harold Glenn Coppage, class of 1959.
Here.
James Max Cornelius, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
George R. Curtis, class of 1959.
Here.
James Ray Evans, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Howard H. Farrell, class of 1959.
Here.
Danae H. Freeman, class of 1959.
Here.
Lonnie Gilbert Garbade, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Gaynell Ray Grigsby, class of 1959.
Here.
Floyd Thomas Halfley, class of 1959.
Here.
Rogers Matthew Hill, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Jack Rudd Hopper, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Mike E. James, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Walter Fred Koppel, class of 1959.
Here.
Richard Lee Killian, class of 1959.
Here.
Raymond H. Linsizen, class of 1959.
Here.
First Lieutenant Bruce B. Lowry, class of 1959.
Here.
Laverne Casper May, class of 1959.
Here.
John Allen Mays, class of 1959.
Here.
Samuel Lloyd Neal, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Joe Allen Parten, class of 1959.
Here.
Bobby Wayne Phillips, class of 1959.
Here.
Thomas J. Prisk III, class of 1959.
Here.
Roberto Prudencio, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. J. Roy Rowland, class of 1959.
Here.
Adolph Farrell Rose, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Ronald D. Salmon, class of 1959.
Here.
Millard Ferdinand Shuey, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Ted N. Shaver, class of 1959.
Here.
Robert W. Skupin, class of 1959.
Here.
Ralph Alexander Smith, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. Billy Allen Sprayberry, class of 1959.
Here.
Dr. John Richard Stedman, class of 1959.
Here.
Lloyd W. Stone, class of 1959.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Floyd S. Thompson, class of 1959.
Here.
Donald James Ursery, class of 1959.
Here.
Donald E. Whitt, class of 1959.
Here.
Bobby D. Wilson, class of 1959.
Here.
James Manroy Wolpman, class of 1959.
Here.
Colonel Irvin Eugene Zuzalik, class of 1959.
Here.
Major Leonard Bell Barker, Jr., class of 1959.
Here.
Charles Elvin Beasley, class of 1959.
Here.
Ronald D. Burnett, class of 1960.
Here.
Julius B. Carroll, class of 1960.
Here.
Floyd H. Christian, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
James Robert Coker, class of 1960.
Here.
Edwin D. Davis, class of 1960.
Here.
Leonard Charles Davis, class of 1960.
Here.
R. Allen Dodgen, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
Weldon James Genzel, Sr., class of 1960.
Here.
Reverend Henry Matthew Haswell, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
John Henry Hensley, class of 1960.
Here.
Donald Edwin Hilliard, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
Dr. Jimmy L. Howard, class of 1960.
Here.
James R. Johnson, class of 1960.
Here.
Gerald Craig Karekis, class of 1960.
Here.
Colonel Kenneth Warren King, class of 1960.
Here.
Robert A. Lacey, class of 1960.
Here.
Jean Raymond Lanningham, class of 1960.
Here.
Donald R. Lester, class of 1960.
Here.
Colonel Frank Lane Lynch, class of 1960.
Here.
Lon Allen Penton, class of 1960.
Here.
John James Robinson, Sr., class of 1960.
Here.
Lonnie Carroll Rogers, class of 1960.
Here.
Paul Alexander Chirac, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
Brigadier General Edmund Sigmund Solomosi, class of 1960.
Here.
Thomas Lee Sutherland, Jr., class of 1960.
Here.
Harold Lynn Adams, class of 1960.
Here.
Donald Walter Anderson, class of 1961.
Here.
Roy V. Baker, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Bradley Charles Blakeway, class of 1961.
Here.
James G. Brewer, class of 1961.
Here.
Wiley Ray Bunton, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Charles Rodney Butler, class of 1961.
Here.
Robert Curtis Clark, class of 1961.
Here.
Bill W. Davis, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Ben Edward Dickerson, class of 1961.
Here.
Benjamin Henry Farrow, class of 1961.
Here.
Otis Wendell Fine, class of 1961.
Here.
Alton F. Fisher, class of 1961.
Here.
James Craig Fleming, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Martin Enrique Garcia, class of 1961.
Here.
Miguel P. Garcia, class of 1961.
Here.
J. Melbourne Gardner, class of 1961.
Here.
James T. Gerard, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Alberto David Gutierrez, Sr., class of 1961.
Here.
Clyde Norris Hale, class of 1961.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Clarence Hare, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
George Sherwood Harrington, class of 1961.
Here.
Thomas W. Hines, class of 1961.
Here.
Richard E. Hudgens, class of 1961.
Here.
Alan Campbell Johnson, class of 1961.
Here.
Donald Hinton Jones, class of 1961.
Here.
Carlos Michael Maggio, class of 1961.
Here.
Olin F. Malman, class of 1961.
Here.
Dan Menzel Olson, class of 1961.
Here.
Paul Jenkins Phillips, class of 1961.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel John G. Porter, class of 1961.
Here.
Tom Calvin Reed, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Ronald C. Wrights, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. Max H. Reinhardt, class of 1961.
Here.
Frank B. Seal, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Edward Joseph Shimshak, class of 1961.
Here.
James Ralph Toland, class of 1961.
Here.
Ronald O. Walker, class of 1961.
Here.
Erwin Carl Wiederstein, Jr., class of 1961.
Here.
Thomas Elbert Wilson, class of 1961.
Here.
Dr. John M. Bell, class of 1962.
Here.
C. Lynn Braswell, class of 1962.
Here.
Hernan Abundio Contreras, class of 1962.
Here.
Jerry Donald Cook, class of 1962.
Here.
Victor Ray Corman, class of 1962.
Here.
Caesar DeLeon, class of 1962.
Here.
Robert Elmore Erisman, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
Norman D. Erskine, class of 1962.
Here.
Zay William Gilbreth, class of 1962.
Here.
Colonel Charles Larry Gordon, class of 1962.
Here.
Stephen B. Grafe, class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. Frank Foy Hall, class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. William H. Hogemeyer, class of 1962.
Here.
Charles Frederick Johnson, class of 1962.
Here.
Jan L. Jones, class of 1962.
Here.
Jerry Wayne Kelly, class of 1962.
Here.
Gerald William Kirsch, class of 1962.
Here.
Herschel Case McDonald, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. McKean, class of 1962.
Here.
Philip Mike Musey, class of 1962.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Lionel John Milberger, class of 1962.
Here.
Arthur T. Moore, class of 1962.
Here.
Thomas Floyd Parrish, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
Kenneth W. Powell, class of 1962.
Here.
Joe Neil Randolph, class of 1962.
Here.
Monty Edward Ritalik, class of 1962.
Here.
John Frederick Schaefer III, class of 1962.
Here.
Thomas Andrew Stafford, class of 1962.
Here.
Charles Bryant Tees, class of 1962.
Here.
Howell Arthur Tompkins, Jr., class of 1962.
Here.
William Jerry Wilson, Sr., class of 1962.
Here.
Dr. Stanley Harold Workman, class of 1962.
Here.
Captain Walter H. Byer, Jr., class of 1963.
Here.
Augusto B. Cruzalagua, class of 1963.
Here.
Dr. Robert Louis Degner, class of 1963.
Here.
John Edward Dollinger, class of 1963.
Here.
David Tillman Edgar, class of 1963.
Here.
Rodney Lewis Goodman, class of 1963.
Here.
James R. Hamilton, Jr., class of 1963.
Here.
John Howard Hopkin III, class of 1963.
Here.
Dallas R. Kuhn, class of 1963.
Here.
Reverend James Hugh Majors, class of 1963.
Here.
Teddy Douglas Mayo, class of 1963.
Here.
James Carroll Nash II, class of 1963.
Here.
Eugene J. Nitch, class of 1963.
Here.
Brian Burrow Amera, class of 1963.
Here.
Harry Allen Payne, class of 1963.
Here.
James D. Pickard, class of 1963.
Here.
Dr. William Hewitt Rabel, class of 1963.
Here.
Jose Ignacio Ramirez, Jr., class of 1963.
Here.
Robert Charles Reese, class of 1963.
Here.
Jerry Rice, Jr., class of 1963.
Here.
Larry Joe Shulgin, class of 1963.
Here.
Gary Al Sliger, class of 1963.
Here.
Dr. Robert Spire, class of 1963.
Here.
Richard H. Searles, Jr., class of 1963.
Here.
Lonnie Dean Thomas, class of 1963.
Here.
Dr. Colbert Wayne Trahan, class of 1963.
Here.
Louis Edward Van Dyke, class of 1963.
Here.
Gail Talmadge Wood, class of 1963.
Here.
Commander Gervais Roy Bachmeyer, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. William M. Barnes, class of 1964.
Here.
Colonel Wiley W. Bell, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Joseph White Bitter, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Edwin Philip Chamberlain, class of 1964.
Here.
Thomas Eugene Cook III, class of 1964.
Here.
John Dies Cuthrell, class of 1964.
Here.
Fred Herman Dutrick, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Billy Don Fabian, class of 1964.
Here.
John Elbert Finks, class of 1964.
Here.
David T. Fowler, class of 1964.
Here.
Raymond Jeffrey Gay, class of 1964.
Here.
James W. Goldsmith Sr., class of 1964.
Here.
Maxwell Herring Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Joe Eddie Hill, class of 1964.
Here.
Robert John Jekyll, class of 1964.
Here.
Frank Richard Kielbasa, class of 1964.
Here.
Royce Malcolm Knox, class of 1964.
Here.
Charles Walker Ligon, class of 1964.
Here.
William Linton Long, class of 1964.
Here.
Kenton Ernest Marshall, class of 1964.
Here.
Dean W. May Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Michael Don McGowan Sr., class of 1964.
Here.
Mike Lynn McNeil, class of 1964.
Here.
David Gordon Morrison, class of 1964.
Here.
Donald D. Nizer, class of 1964.
Here.
Jerry Martin Power, class of 1964.
Here.
Benny Lloyd Powers, class of 1964.
Here.
Dr. Marvin Theodore Ratliff, Jr., class of 1964.
Here.
Charles Scott Sexton, class of 1964.
Here.
Albert Miles Simmons, class of 1964.
Here.
Jesse D. Tyler, class of 1964.
Here.
Thomas Edward Winship, class of 1964.
Here.
The Spirit of Muster by Joey Dean, class of 2005. For all the Ags who have gone before me, who gave all they had for all I now enjoy, our spirit I faithfully carry forward and try to leave a better world behind. Softly call the muster Ags and raise your candle light. Gone, but not forgotten, let 'em hear that old farmer's fight. Today my voice is yours as I call here. I stand for fallen heroes, for those I hold most dear.
Dr. Max S. Amos, class of 1965.
Here.
Leopold Blum Babin, class of 1965.
Here.
John R. Brotherton, class of 1965.
Here.
Advia John Burke, class of
III, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Raymond Lewis Chancellor, class of 1965.
Here.
Glenn W. Devers, class of 1965.
Here.
Michael Edward Fenton, class of 1965.
Here.
Roy J. Fisher, class of 1965.
Here.
Robert Lee Gibson, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Hiram William Hodges, class of 1965.
Here.
Joseph Van Huntington, class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Mitchell Yeager, class of 1965.
Here.
Robert D. Kurlick, class of 1965.
Here.
G. Dewey Licioni, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Alvin Rubel Ludecki, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Donald T. Marburger, class of 1965.
Here.
Dennis W. McGill, class of 1965.
Here.
Robert E. Melton, class of 1965.
Here.
Richard Edmonds Reifsnyder, class of 1965.
Here.
Lewis Frederick Robbins, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Dr. Arthur Chancellor Sharp, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Franklin Joseph Stein, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, class of 1965.
Here.
Rebecca Tisdale, class of 1965.
Here.
Charles Norman Way, class of 1965.
Here.
David E. Wright, Jr., class of 1965.
Here.
Robert A. Yaskovich, class of 1965.
Here.
Benjamin Franklin Alford, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Frank Antosh, class of 1966.
Here.
John Michael Beasley, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Marshall Harold Ballou, class of 1966.
Here.
Kenneth E. Bethy, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Wayne Parker Blackley, class of 1966.
Here.
Norman E. Bond, class of 1966.
Here.
Colonel Olin Finley Brewster, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
Kenneth D. Brock, class of 1966.
Here.
Austin Edwin Brown II, class of 1966.
Here.
Bubber John Collins, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Jack Harold Crawford, class of 1966.
Here.
Frank W. Dublin, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
L. Dwayne Edison, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Don J. Ekval, class of 1966.
Here.
Jerome C. Jarnick, class of 1966.
Here.
Larry Kent Johnson, class of 1966.
Here.
Raleigh Roy Langhoff, class of 1966.
Here.
Doran E. Lemke, class of 1966.
Here.
Mike Harold Mitchell, class of 1966.
Here.
Vincent Donald Newhouse, class of 1966.
Here.
David A. Pendry, class of 1966.
Here.
Ernest Gerhardt Schlutter, Jr., class of 1966.
Here.
William Jeff Singleton, class of 1966.
Here.
Jerry Lynn Smith, class of 1966.
Here.
Dr. Donald Arthur Sweeney, class of 1966.
Here.
Brian L. Webb, class of 1966.
Here.
Roger R. Anderson, class of 1967.
Here.
Milton Ray Arnold, class of 1967.
Here.
Franklin Weldon Barrier, class of 1967.
Here.
Alan Garfield Breed, class of 1967.
Here.
Joe Daniel Bricker, class of 1967.
Here.
Philip Randolph Flowers, class of 1967.
Here.
Kenneth Eugene Green, class of 1967.
Here.
Lavon Ray Harrington, class of 1967.
Here.
James Ernest Jett, class of 1967.
Here.
William James Jett, class of 1967.
Here.
Jesse Henry Kidd II, class of 1967.
Here.
Michael F. Kunetka, class of 1967.
Here.
Melvin Harry Lassell, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. Charles Ernest Neblock, class of 1967.
Here.
John O. Page, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Jimmy D. Pretty, class of 1967.
Here.
Lolita Ann Rollins, class of 1967.
Here.
William David Roberts, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Jamie Marius Rowe, class of 1967.
Here.
Charles E. Sherbel, Jr., class of 1967.
Here.
Richard Abe Scott, class of 1967.
Here.
Harold James Sefjay, class of 1967.
Here.
Dr. Andrew Charles Vestano, class of 1967.
Here.
Carrie B. Wilson, class of 1967.
Here.
Terry P. Archer, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. William Scott Blessing, class of 1968.
Here.
Colonel James Wilson Boswell, class of 1968.
Here.
Richard T. Britton, class of 1968.
Here.
Neil Joseph Broussard, Jr., class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Joe E. Cannon, class of 1968.
Here.
Lonnie Lee Carey, class of 1968.
Here.
Joseph Stephen Carroll, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Willie I. Golden, class of 1968.
Here.
William M. Hutchison, class of 1968.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Charles A. Joyner, Jr., class of 1968.
Here.
James Ross Killen, class of 1968.
Here.
Augustine R. Leto, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. John Edward Matoka, class of 1968.
Here.
Lel L. Medford, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Robert Eugene Miller, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Jeffrey Charles Nyland, class of 1968.
Here.
Robert K. Nordhaus, class of 1968.
Here.
Paul Frank Perone, class of 1968.
Here.
Larry Dwayne Pierce, class of 1968.
Here.
Donald Wayne Porter, class of 1968.
Here.
John Robert Richardson, class of 1968.
Here.
Dwayne R. Roberts, class of 1968.
Here.
Christopher C. Shaw, Jr., class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Rolf Seno, class of 1968.
Here.
Dr. Stephen Grant Stoops, class of 1968.
Here.
Eugene P. Wagner, class of 1968.
Here.
Raymond A. Watson, class of 1968.
Here.
Jess H. Young, class of 1968.
Here.
James Lee Youngblood, class of 1968.
Here.
C. Jim Brunias, Jr., class of 1968.
Here.
Robert Lee Burney, III, class of 1969.
Here.
Edward Harrison Bush, Jr., class of 1969.
Here.
Dr. C. Leslie Carpenter, class of 1969.
Here.
Danny Davison, class of 1969.
Here.
Brian Conrad Dirks, class of 1969.
Here.
Robert Crawford Dillon, Jr., class of 1969.
Here.
Alan R. Dorr, class of 1969.
Here.
Barton Lynn Fuchs, class of 1969.
Here.
William David Greathouse, class of 1969.
Here.
Harry Hudnall Hughes, Jr., class of 1969.
Here.
James Thomas Ivy, class of 1969.
Here.
Dr. Robert Charles Lights III, class of 1969.
Here.
John Marcus Martin, class of 1969.
Here.
Henry Louis Ninest, class of 1969.
Here.
Johnny Lee Perry, class of 1969.
Here.
Roland C. Ray, class of 1969.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Jackson Scott, class of 1969.
Here.
Leonard Hartford Tunnell, Jr., class of 1969.
Here.
Reverend James Paul Worley, class of 1969.
Here.
Ronald Harlan Baker, class of 1970.
Here.
David H. Byer, class of 1970.
Here.
Ronnie Dale Brandon, class of 1970.
Here.
Jack Laurie Burns, class of 1970.
Here.
Ronald W. Chaka, class of 1970.
Here.
Dr. Harold Clontz Clark, Jr., class of 1970.
Here.
Susan Sorensen Davenport Olson, class of 1970.
Here.
Larry Wayne Eon, class of 1970.
Here.
John Douglas Fambrough, class of 1970.
Here.
Kenneth H. Fanolio, class of 1970.
Here.
Dr. William Dean Johnson, class of 1970.
Here.
Adele A. Carbot, class of 1970.
Here.
Ruth May LaBarbera, class of 1970.
Here.
Bill Halbert Lacey, Jr., class of 1970.
Here.
Dora Ann Mailer, class of 1970.
Here.
James Ivy Miller, class of 1970.
Here.
Richard D. Mock, class of 1970.
Here.
Paul Lynn Parker, class of 1970.
Here.
John J. Quisenberry, class of 1970.
Here.
Theodore Michael Smith, class of 1970.
Here.
Dwight David Toney, class of 1970.
Here.
Bruce E. Cheppy, class of 1970.
Here.
John Davis Turner, class of 1970.
Here.
Nicholas Michael Wallace, class of 1970.
Here.
Dr. William M. Watson, class of 1970.
Here.
Dr. Paul A. Will, class of 1970.
Here.
Paul Ferris Amons, class of 1971.
Here.
Dr. Mary U. Ball, class of 1971.
Here.
Leon L. Chandler, class of 1971.
Here.
Stephen Glenn Collier, class of 1971.
Here.
Kathy E. Ryan Collins, class of 1971.
Here.
Tommy D. Cook, class of 1971.
Here.
Captain James J. Dool, class of 1971.
Here.
Ronald E. Keister, class of 1971.
Here.
Robert Mason Lowry III, class of 1971.
Here.
Richard Allen Malahan, class of 1971.
Here.
Arch Clevenger Martin, class of 1971.
Here.
Dr. Roger W. McNeese, class of 1971.
Here.
Kent Michael Mize, class of 1971.
Here.
Dr. Jerry L. Oglesby, class of 1971.
Here.
James Edward Pritchett, class of 1971.
Here.
Luis Rico, class of 1971.
Here.
Michael D. Rushing, class of 1971.
Here.
Bar Walton Simmons, class of 1971.
Here.
Sergeant Major Michael D. Slentz, class of 1971.
Here.
Thomas Leslie Stallings, class of 1971.
Here.
Dr. Johnny Mac Todd, class of 1971.
Here.
Herman T. Toops, Jr., class of 1971.
Here.
Dr. James Albert West, class of 1971.
Here.
Michael L. Woods, class of 1971.
Here.
Samuel Edward Osmus, III, class of 1972.
Here.
Shirley Bilsing, class of 1972.
Here.
Paul Sullivan Brady, class of 1972.
Here.
Commander James D. Breitling, Jr., class of 1972.
Here.
Randolph W. Butler, class of 1972.
Here.
Dr. Robert N. Cooper, class of 1972.
Here.
John Woods Day, class of 1972.
Here.
Rick H. Duplantis, class of 1972.
Here.
Ronald J. Elam, class of 1972.
Here.
Dr. William Harvey Fredrickson, Sr., class of 1972.
Here.
Kenny R. Hensley, class of 1972.
Here.
Fred H. Huddleston, class of 1972.
Here.
Ned Leonard Leyendecker, class of 1972.
Here.
Bruce Newton Lynn, Jr., class of 1972.
Here.
Berlin T. McCabe, Jr., class of 1972.
Here.
Lynn Gillespie Reed, class of 1972.
Here.
Ronald Wayne Roberts, class of 1972.
Here.
Robert M. Shannon, Jr., class of 1972.
Here.
James Scott Smythe, class of 1972.
Here.
Gerald Anderson, class of 1973.
Here.
Michael Lee Bell, class of 1973.
Here.
Dr. Glenn Paul Blodgett, class of 1973.
Here.
Timothy Voss Coffey, class of 1973.
Here.
Walter Patrick Flynn, class of 1973.
Here.
Robert William Gabarshik, class of 1973.
Here.
Nancy Faye Harder, class of 1973.
Here.
James Fletcher Kelly, class of 1973.
Here.
Lori H. Klink, class of 1973.
Here.
Marietta Owen Leyendecker, class of 1973.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Hiram McAdams, class of 1973.
Here.
Stephen Leslie McNair, class of 1973.
Here.
Leroy J. McCuska, class of 1973.
Here.
Dr. Gary S. Nelson, class of 1973.
Here.
John Burson Roach, Jr., class of 1973.
Here.
Carl Arthur Robbins, class of 1973.
Here.
Gordon Frederick Sagebill, class of 1973.
Here.
Scott Manley Sprouse, class of 1973.
Here.
Norman B. Taylor, class of 1973.
Here.
Richard John Wheeler, Jr., class of 1973.
Here.
Major Ira James Whitlock, Jr., class of 1973.
Here.
James Calvin Brothers, class of 1974.
Here.
William Watson Clifton, Jr., class of 1974.
Here.
Jan Baker Dabney, class of 1974.
Here.
Robert Lane Imshoff, class of 1974.
Here.
Otto H. Fritz, class of 1974.
Here.
Buddy Floyd Hale, class of 1974.
Here.
Dr. John Douglas Huckton, class of 1974.
Here.
Dr. Terry J. Humphreys, class of 1974.
Here.
Timothy Edward Hurst, class of 1974.
Here.
Larry W. Jackson, class of 1974.
Here.
William R. Young, class of 1974.
Here.
Robert Edward Layton III, class of 1974.
Here.
Dale G. Miller, class of 1974.
Here.
Captain Michael Gilpin Miller, Sr., class of 1974.
Here.
Sandra K. Nielsen, class of 1974.
Here.
Roy Alvin Pyle, class of 1974.
Here.
Major Donald L. Ritchie, class of 1974.
Here.
William James Rubo, class of 1974.
Here.
Larry L. Stiggins, class of 1974.
Here.
Larry D. Stropey, class of 1974.
Here.
Dr. Michael F. Wagner, class of 1974.
Here.
Clayton Riley Alexander, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Jack Lynn Allen, class of 1975.
Here.
Bill H. Bailey, Jr., class of 1975.
Here.
Stephen John Beckendam, class of 1975.
Here.
Theodore Larry Carr, class of 1975.
Here.
Roy Keith Christian, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Jerry G. Conway,
class of 1975.
Here.
Mary Jane Davis, class of 1975.
Here.
Sandra R. Davis, class of 1975.
Here.
Larry Doyle Durking, class of 1975.
Here.
Dale Lee Donaldson, class of 1975.
Here.
Paul Forrest Fitty, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Bobby Lee Folsom, Jr., class of 1975.
Here.
Armand D. Frank, Jr., class of 1975.
Here.
Gail V. Gouge, class of 1975.
Here.
Dennis Irvin Lawless, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Larry R. Lawrence, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Patricia Gail Lester, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Edward F. Marsubian, class of 1975.
Here.
William Lee McAdams, class of 1975.
Here.
Carolyn Elizabeth McDaniel, class of 1975.
Here.
Gerald E. Mercer, class of 1975.
Here.
Sam Nelson Pegg, class of 1975.
Here.
Dr. Ronald Joe Pressinger, class of 1975.
Here.
Paul Frederick Thames, class of 1975.
Here.
Janet K. Wagner, class of 1975.
Here.
Glenna May Weaver, class of 1975.
Here.
Janet J. Willman, class of 1975.
Here.
Shirley S. Winhorst, class of 1975.
Here.
Daniel Reeves Allen, class of 1976.
Here.
Sister Eileen Rosabelle Benton, class of 1976.
Here.
David Leslie Blankenship, class of 1976.
Here.
Dr. Mark A. Crow, class of 1976.
Here.
George Sidney Davidson, class of 1976.
Here.
Catherine Lynn Edwards, class of 1976.
Here.
Paula C. Ewald, class of 1976.
Here.
William Douglas Finley, class of 1976.
Here.
Michael K. Flowers, class of 1976.
Here.
Robert Valley Gaines, class of 1976.
Here.
Dr. Van William Gardner, Sr., class of 1976.
Here.
Doyle Gascamp, class of 1976.
Here.
Carol Elizabeth Guffey, class of 1976.
Here.
Vicki J. Hamilton, class of 1976.
Here.
Jeffrey D. Haney, class of 1976.
Here.
Michael Ray Hedges, class of 1976.
Here.
William Craig Kittleson, class of 1976.
Here.
Dr. Laird W. Lawrence, class of 1976.
Here.
Elizabeth Sublette Mackey, class of 1976.
Here.
Dr. Stephen B. Montgomery, class of 1976.
Here.
Morris P. Siegert, class of 1976.
Here.
Alan R. Smith, class of 1976.
Here.
Valisa Violetta Sullivan, class of 1976.
Here.
Alvin Ray Walker, class of 1976.
Here.
David R. White, class of 1976.
Here.
Angela Victoria Brazel, class of 1977.
Here.
Richard Donald Cowan, Jr., class of 1977.
Here.
Roxanne L. Cox, class of 1977.
Here.
Bruce D. Dyfick, class of 1977.
Here.
Major Nicholas W. Dobrovolsky, class of 1977.
Here.
Russell A. Engel, class of 1977.
Here.
James Andrew Henserling, class of 1977.
Here.
Janet Elaine Huffman, class of 1977.
Here.
Richard Ivan Mueller, class of 1977.
Here.
Joanne V. Pappas, class of 1977.
Here.
Richard Ned Polk, class of 1977.
Here.
Gregory Bill Reiser, class of 1977.
Here.
Dr. Joseph Milton Rao, Jr., class of 1977.
Here.
Thomas Clinton Schwab, class of 1977.
Here.
Samuel M. Spurlock, class of 1977.
Here.
Dr. Brad K. Stroud, class of 1977.
Here.
Gary W. Tucker, class of 1977.
Here.
Connie J. Van Shiver, class of 1977.
Here.
Christine Ann Wallace, class of 1977.
Here.
Michael O'Marion Williams, class of 1977.
Here.
Ricardo Alonzo, class of 1978.
Here.
Barry C. Ansonek, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Michael Allen Avon, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Robert Webb Bearden, class of 1978.
Here.
Carrie Brent Cato, class of 1978.
Here.
Charles D. Cottle, class of 1978.
Here.
Scott Henson Cavett, class of 1978.
Here.
Paul F. Cecil, Jr., class of 1978.
Here.
Deborah Taylor Clayton, class of 1978.
Here.
Gregory Ellis Coulter, class of 1978.
Here.
Lawrence W. Ezell, class of 1978.
Here.
Ronnie Dale Gajewski, class of 1978.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel John Herman Giesen, class of 1978.
Here.
Troby Lane Hafacker Parrish, class of 1978.
Here.
Daniel B. J., class of 1978.
Here.
Kathleen A. Jennings Mills, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Mark Anthony Johnson, class of 1978.
Here.
Marilyn Telefero Johnson, class of 1978.
Here.
Terry Francis Jones, class of 1978.
Here.
Walter C. Kahanik, class of 1978.
Here.
William J. Carroll, class of 1978.
Here.
Ross Stewart Reynolds, class of 1978.
Here.
Rob Roy Ruth, class of 1978.
Here.
David W. Ryan, class of 1978.
Here.
Dr. Otto B. Schacht, class of 1978.
Here.
Terrence Charles Shaver, class of 1978.
Here.
Jessica Lynn Villarreal, class of 1978.
Here.
Dennis W. Williamson, class of 1978.
Here.
Stephen F. Windsor, class of 1978.
Here.
Jerry Sims Burks, class of 1979.
Here.
David Lindsay Carter, class of 1979.
Here.
Robert Russell Corbell III, class of 1979.
Here.
Frank Alfred DeLeon Jr., class of 1979.
Here.
Edward Kent Dowden, class of 1979.
Here.
Dr. George A. Elliott, Jr., class of 1979.
Here.
Michael James Fleck, class of 1979.
Here.
Dr. James Earl Goodwin, class of 1979.
Here.
Daniel H. Harrison, Jr., class of 1979.
Here.
James C. Johnson, class of 1979.
Here.
Curtis W. Jones, class of 1979.
Here.
Kenneth Klein Jordan, class of 1979.
Here.
David A. Knoll, class of 1979.
Here.
Deborah Ann Lang, class of 1979.
Here.
Rocky Dwayne Lee, class of 1979.
Here.
James L. McVeigh, class of 1979.
Here.
Larry Howard Nemec, class of 1979.
Here.
Mary Louise Perza Poliwada, class of 1979.
Here.
Janet Marie Riedel, class of 1979.
Here.
Alex J. Ringhofer, class of 1979.
Here.
Bruce Poole Turley, class of 1979.
Here.
Carol Jean Wington, class of 1979.
Here.
George E. Atkins, class of 1980.
Here.
Raymond W. Block, class of 1980.
Here.
William Lewis Brewer, class of 1980.
Here.
Nancy B. Deck, class of 1980.
Here.
James W. Hyatt, class of 1980.
Here.
Robert J. Janek, class of 1980.
Here.
Dr. Robert W. Knight, class of 1980.
Here.
Francis Bernice Lewis, class of 1980.
Here.
Corporal Severo Lopez, class of 1980.
Here.
Linda Snyder Reed, class of 1980.
Here.
Stephen Gilbert Tostengard, class of 1980.
Here.
Gregory N. Wahlberg, class of 1980.
Here.
Stephen Douglas Wythe, class of 1980.
Here.
Millicent R. Yunt, class of 1980.
Here.
Stand for Me by Patricia Bell Millsap, class of 1979. Will you stand for me at muster when I leave this earthly plane? Will you answer for me clearly when they call out my name? Will you speak for me a time or two when Aggies gather round, especially at a football game at Kyle Field's hallowed ground? If you can do these things for me, I'll know I'm still a part of the school and friends I leave behind that filled this Aggie's heart.
Betty J. Avery, class of 1981.
Here.
Jerry James Barkley, class of 1981.
Here.
Jacqueline K. Dodd Bisline, class of 1981.
Here.
Robert J. Easley, class of 1981.
Here.
Michael J. Goodenough, class of 1981.
Here.
James Hamilton Hayes, Jr., class of 1981.
Here.
Ronnie William Mars, class of 1981.
Here.
Kenneth E. Mersman, class of 1981.
Here.
Dr. Gene Muncie, class of 1981.
Here.
Deborah Cannon Rivas, class of 1981.
Here.
Janet B. Simmons, class of 1981.
Here.
Bradford Dean Stewart, class of 1981.
Here.
Candace Ann Studevant, class of 1981.
Here.
Bobby Glenn Alexander, Jr., class of 1982.
Here.
David Neil Belknap, class of 1982.
Here.
Daniel W. Burgess,
class of 1982.
Here.
Karen Fisher Childs, class of 1982.
Here.
Ralph Paul Condra, class of 1982.
Here.
Charles Joseph Cortez, class of 1982.
Here.
Britton S. Eccles, class of 1982.
Here.
Darren L. Giles, class of 1982.
Here.
Regina E. Hibbler, class of 1982.
Here.
Mary Lutz Johnson, class of 1982.
Here.
Michael R. Kimmick, class of 1982.
Here.
Karen Yates Lagrasta, class of 1982.
Here.
John Baxter Latimer, class of 1982.
Here.
Gregory West Moordock, class of 1982.
Here.
Michael D. Murphy, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Garnet Work Payne, class of 1982.
Here.
Mark Nelson Peterson, class of 1982.
Here.
Chandra Joan Samuelson, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Eric William Sant, class of 1982.
Here.
John D. Savage, class of 1982.
Here.
Brandon Eugene Simpson, class of 1982.
Here.
Mark A. Skeens, class of 1982.
Here.
Thomas G. Torlincasi, class of 1982.
Here.
Margaret Taylor Vick, class of 1982.
Here.
H. Annette Webb, class of 1982.
Here.
Dr. Stephen Gerald Wizenot, class of 1982.
Here.
Richard C. Brastad, class of 1983.
Here.
Yahida J. Kechanogreta Nava, class of 1983.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Joseph E. Kluboski, class of 1983.
Here.
Kevin Wesley Cockerline, class of 1983.
Here.
Mary Lee Floorschutz, class of 1983.
Here.
James M. Herring, class of 1983.
Here.
Carolyn Carter Lane, class of 1983.
Here.
Virginia King Lehman, class of 1983.
Here.
Sean Allen McLaughlin, class of 1983.
Here.
Edwin Charles Mears, class of 1983.
Here.
Paul D. Ortega, Jr., class of 1983.
Here.
Dr. Robert A. Reeder, class of 1983.
Here.
Aurelia A. Vivero, class of 1983.
Here.
Lester Otis Warner, class of 1983.
Here.
Brian Keith Alfertig, class of 1984.
Here.
Onzo Brent Anderson, class of 1984.
Here.
Kyle J. Benson, class of 1984.
Here.
Waylon Wayne Brune, class of 1984.
Here.
Carrie J. Cross, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Olivia Teresa Garza, class of 1984.
Here.
David L. Harkins, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Nancy Ann Harwood, class of 1984.
Here.
Randall Scott Lemon, class of 1984.
Here.
Betty J. Martin, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Robert William Motherwell III, class of 1984.
Here.
John D. Paniazek, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Delbert Beryl Price, class of 1984.
Here.
Howard J. Schneider, class of 1984.
Here.
A. Christopher Slower, class of 1984.
Here.
Dr. Victor G. Stanley, class of 1984.
Here.
James D. Treadwell, Jr., class of 1984.
Here.
Stephanie M. Winsler, class of 1984.
Here.
Maria T. Arengandegi, class of 1984.
Here.
Hal David Fuel, class of 1985.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Lawrence Frey, Jr., class of 1985.
Here.
William F. Fuller III, class of 1985.
Here.
Todd Bradley Herber, class of 1985.
Here.
Thomas Ewart Lightfoot III, class of 1985.
Here.
Mark Kent Nicholson, class of 1985.
Here.
James William Peet, class of 1985.
Here.
Grayson C. Schlichting, class of 1985.
Here.
William Fred Toda, class of 1985.
Here.
Deanna K. Tennell, class of 1985.
Here.
Robert Timothy Barnett, class of 1986.
Here.
Dr. Janice D. Boyd, class of 1986.
Here.
Karen A. Chelmo, class of 1986.
Here.
Glenn Keith Hurd, class of 1986.
Here.
Carrie Lynn Hunt, class of 1986.
Here.
Clay Dean Mayfield, class of 1986.
Here.
Mary Kayla Hanson Morris, class of 1986.
Here.
Charles Stephen Sachs, Jr., class of 1986.
Here.
Glenn J. Stewart, class of 1986.
Here.
Laura Kathleen Tribble Eldier, class of 1986.
Here.
Ira Lynn Valentine, class of 1986.
Here.
Robert E. Berry, class of 1987.
Here.
Paul Clay Burns, class of 1987.
Here.
Brent A. Dayharsh, class of 1987.
Here.
Tony Wade Featherstorm, class of 1987.
Here.
Ann M. Fiedler, class of 1987.
Here.
David L. Lacombe, class of 1987.
Here.
William Webster Matthews, class of 1987.
Here.
Dr. Elena Posadas Miller, class of 1987.
Here.
Dr. Richard E. Miller, class of 1987.
Here.
Kevin Anthony Monroe, class of 1987.
Here.
Tammany Hedgepath Moore, class of 1987.
Here.
Dr. Teddy Barclay Pope, class of 1987.
Here.
Harold Quintana III, class of 1987.
Here.
Carrie L. Rivers, class of 1987.
Here.
Cecilia Tony Speck Lancaster, class of 1987.
Here.
Alan D. Stockton, class of 1987.
Here.
Dr. Mark Donald Barhorst, class of 1988.
Here.
David Allen Bond, class of 1988.
Here.
Janet M. Doggett, class of 1988.
Here.
Kevin Joseph Driscoll, class of 1988.
Here.
Lori L. Ellis, class of 1988.
Here.
Julie B. Goodman, class of 1988.
Here.
John Merritt Jackson, class of 1988.
Here.
Philip Aaron Jeffers, class of 1988.
Here.
Dr. Melanie D. Caspar, class of 1988.
Here.
Wayne Michael Lisi, class of 1988.
Here.
Raul Javier Monroe Jr., class of 1988.
Here.
John Edward O'Reilly, class of 1988.
Here.
Bertina M. Pracker, class of 1988.
Here.
Mark David Rosema, class of 1988.
Here.
Sandra J. Stroop, class of 1988.
Here.
Dr. Linda J. Yang, class of 1988.
Here.
Kenneth E. Collins, class of 1989.
Here.
Anita Joy Demers, class of 1989.
Here.
Dr. Diego Jose Garcia, class of 1989.
Here.
Christopher Michael Holstead, class of 1989.
Here.
Dr. Ann Elizabeth Yochins, class of 1989.
Here.
Clifford Dane Jones, class of 1989.
Here.
Dr. Lynn Michelle Melanson, class of 1989.
Here.
Dr. Winifred Gerhardstein Mernon, class of 1989.
Here.
Moises E. Robinson Gonzalez, class of 1989.
Here.
Elliot Don Stewart III, class of 1989.
Here.
Mary Rachel Tila, class of 1989.
Here.
Ramon Trujillo Sr., class of 1989.
Here.
Larry Ernst White, class of 1989.
Here.
Cody M. English, class of 1990.
Here.
Richard Dwayne Gasky, class of 1990.
Here.
Gerald Jeff George, class of 1990.
Here.
Dennis G. Horn Jr., class of 1990.
Here.
Mark B. Murray, class of 1990.
Here.
Sonia K. Roden, class of 1990.
Here.
William G. Saxon, class of 1990.
Here.
Martha K. Suter, class of 1990.
Here.
Brian Robert Vassick, class of 1990.
Here.
John W. Vines, class of 1990.
Here.
Andrew Lawrence Funk, class of 1991.
Here.
James Franklin Hoover, class of 1991.
Here.
Kathleen H. Hurley, class of 1991.
Here.
Angela Denise Jacobson, class of 1991.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Damon Gerald Faltzgraf, class of 1991.
Here.
Julie A. Strange, class of 1991.
Here.
Jeffrey Philip Valentine, class of 1991.
Here.
William Dan Baker, Jr., class of 1992.
Here.
Catherine Louise Bricker, class of 1992.
Here.
Colby M. Barnes, class of 1993.
Here.
Richard J. Butzen, class of 1992.
Here.
Susan H. Clark, class of 1992.
Here.
Kimberly Jean Curley, class of 1992.
Here.
Richard Dung Doe, class of 1992.
Here.
Dr. Lauren Taylor Estes, class of 1992.
Here.
Randall D. Garlington, class of 1992.
Here.
Timothy R. Loser, class of 1992.
Here.
Daniel S. Marks, class of 1992.
Here.
William Roy Stevens, class of 1992.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel James Arnold Sukanek, class of 1992.
Here.
Jefferson Brian Abbott, class of 1993.
Here.
Dr. Earl Emil Campa, class of 1993.
Here.
Cherie N. Connor, class of 1993.
Here.
Michael Wade Easterling, class of 1993.
Here.
Joe L. Ernst, class of 1993.
Here.
Tammy M. Inman, class of 1993.
Here.
William Christopher Jackson, class of 1993.
Here.
Barbara A. Jushka, class of 1993.
Here.
Arpana Saith Cagle, class of 1993.
Here.
Stacy Renee Kinsey Kerr, class of 1993.
Here.
Stephen Dwayne Reed, class of 1993.
Here.
Gregory S. Rively, class of 1993.
Here.
Jeffrey David Rogers, class of 1993.
Here.
Edith Marlene Rushing, class of 1993.
Here.
Eric Michael Twardowski, class of 1993.
Here.
Michael B. Jacque, Jr., class of 1994.
Here.
Noe Rolando Gonzalez, Sr., class of 1994.
Here.
Marshall Brian Hedges, class of 1994.
Here.
Carol Jean K. Kretschmer Luxinger, class of 1994.
Here.
Adrian Montgomery, class of 1994.
Here.
Heather J. Pugh, class of 1994.
Here.
Michael James Block, class of 1995.
Here.
Louis Charles Guin, class of 1995.
Here.
Colin Crane Hadley, class of 1995.
Here.
Brent Cole Killian, class of 1995.
Here.
Michael Andrew Marquitos, class of 1995.
Here.
Dr. Barry S. McKinney, class of 1995.
Here.
Cersei
Lee Peoples III, class of 1995.
Here.
John Monroe Ray, class of 1995.
Here.
Ryan Robert Sims, class of 1995.
Here.
Carrie Elizabeth Terry, class of 1995.
Here.
Ray Ellis Bishop, class of 1996.
Here.
Eric Edward Bruton, class of 1996.
Here.
Diane Dugan Hotchkiss, class of 1996.
Here.
Travis Lee Marr, class of 1996.
Here.
The Honorable Deborah Ibarra Mayfield, class of 1996.
Here.
Alan Lynn Williamson, class of 1996.
Here.
William Dwayne Beaver, Jr., class of 1997.
Here.
Darren Ray Cracknell, class of 1997.
Here.
Trinidad Jose Garcia, class of 1997.
Here.
Keith Allen Molden, class of 1997.
Here.
Charles Taylor McGinnis IV, class of 1997.
Here.
William Patrick Parkey, class of 1997.
Here.
Roberto Antonio Salazar, class of 1997.
Here.
Eric Francis von Limden, class of 1997.
Here.
Letha R. Ainley, class of 1998.
Here.
Aaron Ross Golson, class of 1998.
Here.
Douglas Brooks Rogers, class of 1998.
Here.
Nicole Marie Willis, class of 1998.
Here.
Paul Wayne Brager, Jr., class of 1999.
Here.
Dr. Eli Cole Dodson, class of 1999.
Here.
Michelle Catherine Frolick, class of 1999.
Here.
Ashley Dawn Victoric, class of 1999.
Here.
Tamara L. Adami, class of 2000.
Here.
Eric Galen Anthematin, class of 2000.
Here.
Christy D. Baber, class of 2000.
Here.
Antonio Perez, Jr., class of 2000.
Here.
Carolyn Richardson Potter, class of 2000.
Here.
Aaron Lynn Redding, class of 2000.
Here.
Adolph Matt Ressler III, class of 2000.
Here.
James Allen Brown, class of 2001.
Here.
Brandy Lindsay Cato, class of 2001.
Here.
David Gonzalo Franco, class of 2001.
Here.
Dr. Margaret Ann McGuire, class of 2001.
Here.
Amanda L. Moeller, class of 2001.
Here.
Aaron D. Reese, class of 2001.
Here.
Lee E. Williams, class of 2001.
Here.
Dr. Clifford B. Blackerby, class of 2002.
Here.
Christopher Ryan Bledsoe, class of 2002.
Here.
Melody Cooper, class of 2002.
Here.
Christy Lynn Farmer, class of 2002.
Here.
Jamie Beth Mars, class of 2002.
Here.
Shauna Lee Schultz, class of 2002.
Here.
Daryl David Williamson, class of 2002.
Here.
Christopher Dane Fuller, class of 2003.
Here.
Dr. Scott Allen McInich, class of 2003.
Here.
Christopher John Swafford, class of 2003.
Here.
Mindy Lynn House, class of 2004.
Here.
Adam Trent Massey, class of 2004.
Here.
Jason Richard Roselle, class of 2004.
Here.
Shannon Elizabeth Eder Thompson, class of 2004.
Here.
Danielle Gabrielle Young, class of 2004.
Here.
James Mark Garza, class of 2005.
Here.
Lisa Nicole Glassman, Class of 2005.
Here.
Travis Taylor Hayes, Class of 2005.
Here.
Andrew Seth Helmrich, Class of 2005.
Here.
Dr. Philip Edward Schur, Class of 2005.
Here.
Marina T. Gonzalez, Class of 2006.
Here.
Joseph Aaron Minjares, Class of 2006.
Here.
John Douglas Brockway, Class of 2007.
Here.
Dr. Adam Nelson Carr, Class of 2007.
Here.
Major Andrew David Cotter, Class of 2008.
Here.
Dr. Amber Lynn Ducat, Class of 2008.
Here.
Justin Matthew Cornegay, Class of 2008.
Here.
Drew Philip Rogers, Class of 2008.
Here.
Mark Andrew Bussing, Class of 2009.
Here.
Jonathan Joseph Gibson, Class of 2009.
Here.
John Carl Pennywitt II, Class of 2009.
Here.
John Austin Simmons, Class of 2009.
Here.
James Russell Berghart, Class of 2011.
Here.
Chad Mason Cooper, Class of 2011.
Here.
Daniel Jeffrey Fennessy, Class of 2011.
Here.
Aaron Lee Petty, Class of 2011.
Here.
Matthew Charles Potts, Class of 2011.
Here.
Grady William Fulbright, Class of 2012.
Here.
John Thomas Harden, Class of 2012.
Here.
Colton Shane Love, Class of 2012.
Here.
Ryan Paul McDonald, Class of 2012.
Here.
Lindsay Joanna Salazak, Class of 2012.
Here.
Kelsey Lynn Klinkenberg, Class of 2013.
Here.
Travis Ryan Otter, Class of 2013.
Here.
Michael Patrick Walsh, Class of 2013.
Here.
Misty Rochelle Jackson Davis, Class of 2014.
Here.
Michael Joseph Gorman, Class of 2015.
Here.
Tyler Thomas Harrison, Class of 2015.
Here.
Chavez O'Neill Hart, Class of 2015.
Here.
Cash O'Neill Rogers, Class of 2015.
Here.
Scott Christopher Barnes, Class of 2016.
Here.
Jarrett Allen Bennett, Class of 2016.
Here.
Nicholas Quaid Pedrati, Class of 2016.
Here.
Charles Dean Caleb Ryle, Class of 2016.
Here.
Jordan Christopher Smiley, Class of 2016.
Here.
Cole Matthew Joyner, Class of 2017.
Here.
First Lieutenant Parker William Nash, Class of 2017.
Here.
Jorge Adrian Garza, Class of 2018.
Here.
Shelby Rose Martin, Class of 2018.
Here.
Adolfo Reyes, Class of 2018.
Here.
Jacob Calvin Baker, Class of 2019.
Here.
Connor Todd Sherrod, Class of 2019.
Here.
Jacob Daniel Williamson, Class of 2019.
Here.
Alexia Aguilar, Class of 2020.
Here.
Sean Michael Giffen, Class of 2020.
Here.
Angel Armando Navarro, Class of 2020.
Here.
Michael Sherrod Willis, Class of 2020.
Here.
Dr. Amr Muhammad Abdullah, Class of 2021.
Here.
Alexander Garner Brown, Class of 2021.
Here.
Sasha Maximilian Grimmelsbacher, Class of 2021.
Here.
Gabriella Zoe Tostenson, Class of 2021.
Here.
Britton Clay Dossman, Class of 2022.
Here.
Carson Davis Fitzgibbon, Class of 2022.
Here.
Harrison Miller Fuller, Class of 2022.
Here.
Tanner Reese Hong, Class of 2022.
Here.
Arun M. Kumar, Class of 2022.
Here.
Arubio Arbella Ballum, Class of 2022.
Here.
Nicholas James Bruckner, Class of 2023.
Here.
Caleb Matthew Law, Class of 2023.
Here.
Tyler Wade Ryan, Class of 2023.
Here.
Corey Eugene Willis, Class of 2023.
Here.
Benjamin David Hamilton, Jr., Class of 2024.
Here.
Magana Davy Kodali, Class of 2024.
Here.
Victoria Christine Solarek, class of 2024. Eric Arthur Tuck Otario, class of 2024. Ivan Zabrodine, class of 2024. Blake Davis Barnes, class of 2025. Matthew Anthony Calderon, class of 2025. Andrew Paul Coleman, class of 2025. Emilio Fernando Reyes, class of 2025. Asher Drake Rollins, class of 2025. Waylon Grant Collins, class of 2026.
The next segment of the worldwide roll call for the absent includes Aggies whose deaths were reported to the association after April 16th, followed by honored faculty, staff, and friends of Texas A&M.
William Morris Polk, class of 1950. Colonel Harold J. Shockley, class of 1950. F. Lynn Estep, Jr., class of 1952. William S. Boehm, class of 1965. Tat M. Yu, class of 1973. Colin D. Crombie, class of 1979. Guillermo Rodriguez, class of 1994. Chad P. Yunke, class of 1999. Lola A. Garcia, class of 2003. Teresa Becca. Dr. Joe Dixon. Dr. Nancy Dyer. Norma Funkhauser. Dr. Ken Harding. Dr. James Francis McNamara. Sean McNeese. Louis Muniz. Norma Pantoja. Gloria Rao. Dr. Norman Ronald. Dr. Donnie Self. Robert Skelton.
The final segment of the worldwide roll call for the absent comprises corrections to some names that were called incorrectly or that were inadvertently omitted earlier in the reading of this roll.
Robert V. Thurmond, class of 1945. Colonel Howard Ross Oliver, class of 1946. Jack Dement Swatzel, Sr., class of 1946. Milton H. Abelow, class of 1947. Charles H. Weinbaum, Jr., class of 1947. Dr. Alton Arnold Bishop, class of 1948. Olin Maurice Boyd, class of 1948. Arthur Wilburn Brown, Jr., class of 1948. Colonel Robert Franklin Lynch, class of 1948. Dr. Ray Paul Reed, class of 1949. Donald L. Grant, class of 1951. Theodore Charles Lawrence, Jr., class of 1951. Thomas David Bain, class of 1952. Max B. Green, class of 1954. Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Brock Staples, class of 1956. William Tandy Ayers, class of 1957. Will Clayton Hendricks, Jr., class of 1957. Winston Pascal Odom, class of 1958. Major Leonard Bell Barker, Jr., class of 1960. Charles Elvin Beasley, class of 1960. Harold Lynn Adams, class of 1961. David Walter Anderson, class of 1961. Miguel P. Garcia, class of 1961. Victor Ray Corman, Jr., class of 1962. Cesar de Leon, class of 1962. Colonel Wiley W. Bell, class of 1964. Advia John Burke III, class of 1965. Hiram William Hodges, class of 1965. G. Dewey Lashoney, Jr., class of 1965. Alvin Rubel Ludicky, Jr., class of 1965. L. Dwayne Eidson, class of 1966. Charles E. Kendall, class of 1968. C. Jim Brunges, Jr., class of 1969. Barry Walton Simmons, class of 1971. Michael L. Wood, class of 1971. Robert William Grabarczyk, class of 1973. William James Rumbo, class of 1974. Armand D. Frank, Jr., class of 1975. Dr. Patricia Gay Lester, class of 1975. Janet J. Willman, class of 1975. Marilyn Taliaferro Johnson, class of 1978. Dennis V. Williamson, class of 1978. Carol Jean Wigington, class of 1979. George E. Akins, class of 1980. Dr. Stephen Gerald Wisnett, class of 1982. Yahira J. Kachanagrade Nava, class of 1983. James D. Treadway, Jr., class of 1984. Maria T. Argandegi, class of 1985. Tammy Hedgepath Moore, class of 1987. Arnold Quintana III, class of 1987. Raul Javier Moreno, Jr., class of 1988. Colby M. Burns, class of 1992. Roger Dung Do, class of 1992. Heather J. Puig, class of 1994. Jorge Adrian Garza, class of 2018. Adolfo Reyes, class of 2018. Malcolm Sherrod Willis, class of 2020. Arhun M. Kumar, class of 2022. Audrey Arbayo Valim, class of 2022. Eric Arthur Tuck Otero, class of 2024. Blake Douglas Barnes, class of 2025. Emilio Fernando Reyes, class of 2025. Dr. Ronald C. Wrights, class of 1961. Janet J. Willman, class of 1975.
In Memoriam by Lieutenant Colonel David Harrigan, class of 1968. We stood a little taller and a little prouder then when we heard the call of muster and the roll call just began. We stood there all together and wiped away the tears when our names were called out softly and answered with a "here." And so we've joined together with our brothers of the past to make our final resting place at Aggieland, our last. We take a toast to our brotherhood wherever they may roam. For us, the trek is over. Aggieland, we're coming home.
My fellow Aggies, on behalf of the Association of Former Students, thank you for sharing this time with us today. We close this muster with a salute. We salute Texas A&M, the unique institution that shaped all of us into the men and women that we are today and continues shaping us. We salute the countless Texas Aggies who give so selflessly of their time and energy by volunteering to plan hundreds of musters around the world, including this one. And we salute each and every one of the Aggies we've lost in the past year. The family and the friends whose names we've called today and for whom we proudly answered here, marking them forever present in our hearts on this Aggie Muster Day. The 2023 worldwide muster roll call for the absent is now complete, Aggies. Thanks and gig 'em. We'll meet some other day, but until we do, may all of our lives be filled with the spirit of Aggieland.
Some may boast of prowess bold, of the school they think so grand. But there's a spirit can ne'er be told, it's the spirit of Aggie land. We are the Aggies are we, true to each other as Aggies can be. We've got to fight, boys, we've got to fight. We've got to fight for maroon and white. After they've boosted all the rest, then they will come and join the best. For we are the Aggies are we. We are from Texas AMC.